Hey everyone, happy Tuesday. Happy Credit Tuesday. I hope you guys are doing amazing today. I hope you're having the best day of your life. I hope you're taking time to take care of yourself, along with taking time to take care of everything else you have going on. Um, Please put in the chat where you're checking in from. My internet isn't doing amazing today, so I'm not going to be on here that long. But I wanted to get with you guys, like I said, and talk about credit. We have to understand how credit works. I just had a conversation with a client yesterday about their credit cards. And today, that is what we're going to do. We're going to talk about my favorite subject, credit cards. Okay. So we're going to go into credit cards today. Last week, we went into payment history and we discussed payment history and how to dispute negative items on your credit report. And today we're going to focus on my baby, which is credit cards and understanding how they work. So, again, keep telling me what you guys want to talk about, what you guys want me to talk about. I love credit. Credit is amazing. It literally changes your life. You know, we're so lucky that as Americans, we're so lucky that we're able to get houses and cars and businesses using credit. You know, we don't have to come up with all of the cash to buy a house or all the cash to buy a car. We can actually use credit to build generational wealth, to build our legacy. And so credit is, I just think it's amazing. And I think that once you understand it, you can manipulate it well, so that, you know, it helps you build your generational wealth. I think the crazy part about credit is that nobody explains it, but they judge us on our credit all the time. So I am here to explain how credit works, to make it bite-sized and digestible so that you can really, really get how credit works and how you can get your scores to an 800 and how you can help your clients get their scores up so they can buy houses. Okay. So I am going to show my screen. And today, again, we are going to talk about credit cards. And I am really excited. Okay. So, like I said, last week we talked about payment history. We talked about payment history, and we talked about disputing negative items, and we talked about late payments and how much they affect your credit. Today, what we're going to talk about is credit cards. Credit cards are worth 30% of your score. 30% of your score. So they're a big part of your score. 35% of your score is the biggest part, and that is your payment history, how you pay your bills. Any late payments, charge-offs, collections, they go into that 35%. So when people come to me and they're like, Bonita, I don't understand why I don't have great credit. I pay all my bills on time. I pay all my credit cards on time, and my scores are still in the 500s or they're still in the 600s. What is that about? Usually, it is about credit cards, and it's about your debt ratio on your credit cards. Okay. So your credit cards are worth 30% of your score. But it's not just having credit cards that affect this 30%. It's how you use them. Okay. So if you do not have credit cards, you are missing out on this 30%. Okay. So it's kind of like if you were in class and your teacher said the final exam is worth 30%, you can do well in every other part of the class, come to class on time, do all your homework, you know, all that stuff. But if you miss the final exam, the most you can get is a 70, is a C. You cannot get A+ credit unless you have credit cards. Okay. So you have to have credit cards. I know everybody's like, I don't like credit cards. Credit cards, they, you know, some people are like, credit cards are the devil, but no, you have to have credit cards. to get A plus credit. You have to have credit cards to get into the 700 scores. In my 9 years of working on people's credit, I've only seen 2 people in the 700s that had no credit cards, right? But they had houses on their credit, they had cars on their credit, and they were older. They had a lot of old stuff on their credit. But most of the time, to even get to the 700s, you have to have credit cards, okay? But it's not just about having credit cards. You have to keep your credit cards at a low balance, okay? So everybody knows, or everybody, not everybody, but some people have heard about keeping your credit cards below 30%, okay? When you are trying to do big things with your credit, 30% is not your number. You want to be way below 30%, okay? So let's talk about how you get that math, how you get 30% of your credit cards. Let me pull out my calculator. Okay, so 30%. Now, let's make the math really easy. Let's say you have a $500 credit card. Hey, Sonia, how you doing? All right, let's say you have a $500 credit card and your balance is $290, right? $290, and it's a $500 credit card. So to get how much you're utilizing, you take $290 and you divide it by 500. Nope, that's not it. Sorry. You take $290 and you divide. Why is my calculator doing much? Let me put it on my screen. $290 and you divide that by 500. All right. 58. Okay. So you move the decimal over 2% to get the percentage. That means you're utilizing 58% of your credit card. Okay. Anytime you're above 30% utilization, it hurts your credit. The closer you are to the limit of your credit card, the more it's going to hurt your credit. If you are ever over the limit of your credit card, it is going to devastate your credit for that month. Okay. I've seen credit scores drop 100 points because someone was over the limit on a $200 credit card or on a $500 credit card. It does not matter what the limit is, but if you are over the limit, it is going to devastate your score for that month. Okay. So let's do the math again. Let's say you're at 58% utilized if you spend $290, right? Let's say that you're looking at someone's credit report, you're looking at your credit report, and you are using $450. Yeah, something's wrong with my mouse. Okay, let's say you're using $450 on a $500 credit card. So you take the balance and you divide it by the actual limit, right? That means that you're using, and you move the decimal over 2, that means you're using 90% of your credit card, okay? 90% is going to devastate your score, right? So what we tell people is every 10% that you go down, it's going to raise your scores more, okay? So sometimes people don't have all of the money to pay down their credit cards. You know, sometimes when we're working with our clients and we're telling them where they need to get their credit cards at, of course, we always tell them they need to get their credit cards to 10% of the limit. 10% is the magic number, right? Anytime you're between 1 and 10% of the limit, that is how you get to the 700 scores. But sometimes clients don't have $400 to put on their credit cards this month, right? Sometimes they're like, Bonita, I have an extra $150. How should I split up this $150 so that I can have my scores move, right? So what we tell them, and this is for you to understand too, is that every 10% that you go down on your utilization, it's going to affect your score. So if you move, like let's say she puts the $150 on this $450 limit, right? So that means that they're going to move. If their balance was 450 and they add $150, they pay $150. That means that their balance will now be $300, right? 300 divided by 500. That means that it will move from 90% utilized down to 60% utilized. Okay. When you move 30% down, that is going to help your scores. You're going to see movement on your credit scores, right? If you only have, so what I tell people is, because sometimes people have this notion that I need to save up all my money and then I need to put a big chunk on my credit cards to get it down to 10%. Every little bit counts. Every little bit counts. Your goal is 10%, but even if you can just put 150 this month, or $50 extra this month, or $100 extra this month, it is going to move your percentage down and it's going to help your scores. But once you get below 30% utilization, you're going to see a big jump in your scores, right? Because whenever you're below 30%, it's no longer hurting your credit. But if you wanted to really, really help your credit, your goal is 10% of the limit. Okay. So to figure out what 10% of the limit is, see, honestly, I don't know that equation, but it's in my head. It's in my head. So I always just move the decimal over 2 points, right? So if you have $1,000 credit card, 10% of that would be $100. So you move the decimal over 2 or over 1, and then you'll get 10% of that. Okay. So if you have a $5,000 credit card and you move the decimal over 1, that means 10% of $5,000 is $500, right? So 10% of whatever the limit is your goal when it comes to your credit cards. 10% of the limit. Now, I know that seems low. I know people are like, they say it all the time when I'm doing these workshops explaining how your credit works. Everyone's always like, why would they give you a $5,000 credit card if they only want you to use 10% of it, right? They're testing you every month. They're trying to see if you are dependent on this money, okay? And in their mind, if you're using more than 30% of your credit cards, you're dependent on these credit cards to get you through the month. You're dependent on them. You're using them for groceries. They don't really know what you're using them for. So I'm not saying don't use your credit cards for groceries. I'm just saying that whenever you're spending more than 30% of your credit cards, or you're keeping a balance of more than 30% of your credit cards, in the bank's minds, they think that you're dependent on it to get through the month. And if you're dependent on $500 cards or even $10,000 cards to get through the month, are you really ready for a new bill? Are you really ready for a new car note? Are you really ready for a new credit card or a new mortgage? In their mind, it's like, I don't know if Bonita's ready. I don't know if Sonia's ready, right? So that's why you want to be way under 30% so you can show them that this is play money for you. Like, you're not dependent on these cards to get you through the month. You're just using the cards to maybe get points, or using the cards, for little things. But you have money reserved in your bank. You have, you're not dependent on these cards. So that's why the goal is always to get way below the dependent line. Dependent line is 30%, down to 10%. Okay. Now, I know that seems low, but you can actually be too low on your credit cards. Anytime you're below 1% utilization on your credit cards, it doesn't count anymore. They don't give you any extra points. I've seen people pay their cards all the way down to 0, and they lose 50 points on their credit scores. And they're like, Bonita, I just paid all my credit cards off. Why are my scores lower? They want to see that you're using the cards, but they don't want to see that you're dependent on the cards. So there is a really short line, and the percentage is 1 to 10%. Okay. So with a $500 credit card, that's between $5 and $50. With a $5,000 credit card, that's between $50 and $500. With a $200 credit card, between $2 and $20. Whatever your limit is, your balance needs to stay between 1 and 10%. Now, there are two exceptions to this rule, right? The first exception to this rule is if the card is a store card, a card that you can only use um, if the card is a store card, a card that you can only use at this particular store, like a Macy's card, you can only use the Macy's card at the Macy's store, or some gas cards, you can only use this credit card at this gas station, right? Cards that can only be used at that store, you can keep the balance between 0 and 10%, okay? And then the other exception to the rule is if the card is older than 7 years. If you had this card for longer than 7 years, then they trust you at that point. Then you can keep the balance between 0 and 10%. Okay. If the card is older than 7 years, because I have clients all the time. My grandma pays her cards all the way down to 0 every month, and she has 850 credit scores, Bonita. Yes, because your grandma has older cards or your auntie has older cards. If your cards are older than 7 years, yes, you can keep them at 0. Okay. But if they are younger than 7 years, they're testing you every month, and you got to keep the cards between 1 and 10%. Now, so the one thing you also want to remember about credit cards is when you're keeping your card at 0% or you're not really using the card that often, something can happen. Like sometimes people call me and they're like, Bonita, they just closed my credit card. What happened? Right. So whenever you apply for a card, you have to scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. And then you say, I agree. Right. And one of the things you're agreeing to is that they can go in their back office at any point and check your credit scores, right? So they can go and check and do a soft pull on your credit if you have a credit card with them or a loan with them, right? And sometimes what they're doing is quarterly, they're looking to see how you're utilizing other credit cards. If you're maxed out on other credit cards, and even though you're good with them, even though you're keeping their card looking good or whatever, but if you're maxed out on other credit cards, what they may do is lower your limit because they're like, okay, Bonita's maxed out on these two cards. I know she's doing good over here, but she's maxed out over here. Maybe something's going on with her. Maybe she lost her job or she's sick and she can't pay it on these cards. Maybe she's about to charge up our card too and then be maxed out on this card and then file bankruptcy. Let's lower her limit to reduce our risk, right? Or what they could do is they could look and see that you're not really utilizing the card that often. You keep the card at 0. You haven't used it in 2 years. And what they might do then is they might actually close the card because they're like, Bonita's not using this card. Why do we still have her on our books? Anytime they give you a loan / a credit card, right? They have to take out insurance on the money they give you. So if they give you a $5,000 credit card, they need to take out insurance on that $5,000. If anything happens, you stop paying the card, it goes into collections, you file bankruptcy, what they're going to do is they're going to charge off the balance to their insurance. That's why you hear the word charge off, okay? So they're going to charge off the balance to their insurance. But while you have this card, they have to pay for this insurance. So if you're not utilizing the card, if you're keeping it at 0 for a year, 2 years, for them sometimes it's not worth it because they're paying for the insurance. They have to pay each month to report it to the credit bureaus. They're sending out balances in the mail or maybe you set it up for automatic come to your email. But either way, it's costing them money to keep your account. So they might close your account if you're not utilizing. So I always tell people, especially if the card is older than 7 years, to try to use the card at least once a year so that they don't close it. Because once they close it, they will not reopen it. They'll give you a new card. You have to start all over. But once they close a card, they're not going to reopen it and give you back those 7, 10, 15 years of great history on your credit report, okay? So that's just another tidbit on your credit cards. Make sure you're keeping a balance, but you're keeping a small balance. Now, when you're starting off, yes, if you have any questions, please put in the chat. I'm taking questions. I hope you guys are getting some good information. I go on these rants. I'm thinking about other people's questions when when I start going on and answering questions as if I'm reading your mind. So, but if you actually have a question, please put it in the chat because I do want to answer it. Yes, Sonia, a lot of times people don't realize that once it's below 1%, it is going to affect your credit report because that sweet spot is between 1 and 10%. So having your credit cards at 2% is going to give you more points than having it at 10%. Having your credit cards at 3% is going to give you more points than having it at 5%. But once you go below 1%, you lose all those points. You lose all those points. Having it below 1% is exactly the same as having it at 30% utilized. 30% and below 1% are both neutral. It is not helping you or hurting you. It is almost the same as not having a credit card at all. Okay. So the sweet spot is between 1 and 10%. So let's say you get an extra 50 points on your credit report because you have it at 2%. And then you just get excited and you just pay all the cards down. You don't use it anymore. And you don't use it anymore. And now you're at below 1%. So that extra 50 points that you were getting for having it at 2% is gone now. So you're losing those points. And that's why sometimes people's scores actually drop when they pay their cards all the way down to zero. So I had a client yesterday and we're working with her to build her credit. And she has 5 credit cards, right? When she came into our program, we gave her the game plan. We said, all right, these 3 cards are at 50% utilized. These 2 cards are at 90% utilized. And no, I think she had 1 card at 90% utilized, and then 1 card was in the sweet spot at 10%. So I was like, okay, let's do this. Why don't you get the 3 cards that are at 50% utilized? Because we asked her how much money does she have to put on her credit cards? What is her game plan? How soon does she want to buy a house? Because the goal is always 10%. So I'm saying the goal is always 10%, but sometimes we have to focus on the smaller cards first. So we gave her a game plan. She's like, I got an extra $200 to $300 a month that I can put on the credit card. So I'm like, put this on this, put this on this. And so she did something, but it wasn't what we told her. And she was really excited about it. She had texted me and said, oh, I paid off 2 credit cards. And honestly, I was kind of excited for her too, because she said she had an extra $300. So it was literally going to move these cards down from 50% utilized down to 30%, which would help her score. But I thought she just got some extra money. And so she was able to pay him down. So I was like, that's amazing. So then we look at her credit report and her scores actually dropped. And she was upset. And she was like, I paid down 2 credit cards down to that 10%. No, she actually paid them down to 0. I paid down 2 cards down to 0. And why would my scores drop? And so we looked at her credit report. And what happened was she paid 2 cards down to 0. But then she charged 2 cards over the limit. So I was like, your score is actually worse than it was before, because now you have 2 cards that are over the limit. And anytime a card is over the limit, it is going to devastate your scores. I understand that you got 2 cards down, but what it looks like is you paid 2 cards down and then you kind of leaned on these other 2 cards and raised their limits. All right. And plus you paid it down to 0. Again, and so we explained, as I went over, 0 is not the win. You want to keep it between 1 and 10%. So then we met with her again the following month, and she had gotten 2 cards down to 10%, and there was still 2 cards over the limit. And they were over the limit by like $8, right? And so we went through the numbers again, and it's really, and it is annoying. Like sometimes clients are like, Bonita, all you talk about is credit cards, da 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 da. And I'm like, okay, well, we can talk about the other stuff. And I told her, I was like, we were able to get 4 items off your credit report and your scores are still fluctuating. 4 negative items came off your credit report and your scores are still fluctuating. They're not going up because these credit cards, they look at each card individually. I'm telling you, they look at each card individually and then they look at all the cards collectively when it comes up, when they're measuring how it's going to affect this 30% of your score, right? So you can't like lean on one card or lean on 2 cards to pay down 2 cards. Your goal is to make sure that, especially when you're about to buy a house or about to buy a car and you're trying to get these credit cards down, you take those cards out of your pocket. You take them out of your wallet. You leave them at home because I'm telling you, emergencies will happen. And you will be like, I'm just going to use this card one time and then I'm going to pay it down. I'm going to pay it down and pay it down. But you got to take them out your wallet and you got to be, you have to have your why be bigger than the emergency or the sale that's happening this month. Your why is your car, is your house, because it is about budgeting, because we love using our credit cards. We love getting the extra points. And then sometimes we do have to lean on them to get through the month. But again, they're looking at it and they're saying, if you're leaning on a $500 credit card or you're leaning on $1,000 credit card, are you really ready for this new bill? So I'm going to take a second and look at the questions because we're running up against our time. I hope I gave you guys some great information about credit cards. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'm going to look back and answer people's questions in the chat. Also, if you have a client that needs help with their credit, do not hesitate to call me. If you have some questions about your clients or about yourself and your credit cards, don't hesitate to call me. But what I'm trying to say today is credit cards, if you heard anything I'm saying, it really does. And I know it's annoying. Everyone always says it. I know it's annoying, but your balance is on your credit cards. You do not know when they're going to report the limit and the balance to the credit bureaus. So when you are trying to make big moves on your credit cards, or when you're trying to make big moves with your credit, you just want to get those cards to that sweet spot and you just want to keep them there. There's so much stuff on Instagram and Facebook that tells you, charge it and then pay it 3 days before the bill is due and you'll be fine. And you don't know, they switch it up each month. Just because your bill reported to the credit bureaus on the 18th of last month doesn't mean they're going to report on the 18th of this month. You do not know when they're going to report your balance and your limit to the credit bureaus, and you do not want to play Russian roulette with your credit. So you want to get your cards down to where they need to be and keep them there. All right, so let me look. What can I do about a charge off? All right, so once, so Michelle, hey Michelle, she asks, what can I do about a charge off? All right, so a charge off is when your credit cards or your collection, no, it's usually with a credit card or some sort of loan, like a personal loan or an auto loan. They're going to start with a 30-day late, a 60-day late, 90-day late. Once they get to about 180 days late, then they can charge off your account. A charge off means that they're charging off the debt to the insurance company and they're making it a collection now, right? So once it hits 180 days, they're not allowed to charge off an account until it is late for at least 180 days. So if you have an account that was late for 60 days and then they try to charge it off, that's not how it goes. They can't charge it off after 60 days. Sometimes they try to do that, but then we'll dispute it and just get it off your credit report because that is not what they're supposed to do. But these collection agencies, they try crazy stuff all the time. All right, so once you have a charge off, what you do is you can dispute it. So definitely look back at the last live on Tuesday, and I talked about disputing and how you can dispute with the credit bureaus, how to write letters, all that good stuff. So once it's in the charge off mode, we can dispute it. All right. All right, we're not talking about business credit, but Sonia, I will call you about that because you know I'll be going on tangents with business credit. I saw your message, but I will call you about that. There are ways of disputing filing on your business credit, so we will go over that. That is a part of the series. All right, so we are at our time. I hope you guys got some great information. I love you guys. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your day. Make sure you get some lunch. And I will come back next Tuesday, and we are going to be talking about my third favorite, which is your age of file, like how old things on your credit report help your credit score, how closed-in accounts don't always help your credit score, what accounts to close, what accounts to keep open. So we're going to go over that next week. All right. Have a great day. Love you guys. Have a good one. You're welcome. No problem.